Stripe.
So chapter one opens with Mr. Lockwood, who is not technically a player in the story. He's us. He's the audience. He's the one being told the story from someone who is a player, but not really a player, but has been a part of the story. She is telling the tale of Wuthering Heights to him. And most importantly, the story literally opens with 1801. I have just returned from a visit to my landlord. Why is this important? Well, the recent pictures being put out of the movie, Margot Robbie is in a wedding dress that looks kind of Victorian, not accurate, but if you squint, it has more of a similar silhouette to 1850, 1860s Victorian style. And even though Emily Bronte had lived and wrote during the Victorian, the story takes place in mid Regency, late Georgian. So Mr. Lockwood comes in at 1801, but the story of Wuthering Heights itself takes place about 1770s, 80s, 90s, about so like Lockwood comes in years after the finale of the events of Wuthering Heights, kind of, or like the pause in the story before the finale. And there's a lull, I guess you can say. And why does this matter? Because it changes a lot. One, the tone of the story, the fashion of the story is very different. The fashion starts changing rapidly from between 1790s and 1800s is very different. Between 1800s to 1820s, very different. 1830s, 40s, 50s, 60s, extremely different silhouettes and styles. So there's a vast difference, but also it makes sense that Emily Bronte had set her story during the 1780s and 90s because that was the peak of the Gothic stories. That's when they were all being written and told during, like, think of Jane Austen's Northanger Abbey talking about, the mystery of Udolpho, all those Gothic stories. They're coming out of that era. So it makes sense that Emily Bronte is doing an homage to those stories that she probably has read herself, and it would make sense that she would be writing in that period. It'd be the same as anyone today wanting to write a story similar to Jane Austen. Of course, they would write it during Regency. So changing the era to Victorian also changes the story because the socio-political climate is very different during the 1790s versus the Victorian times, which then affects the story. So this is why the time period is important to some readers. You can, however, alter the story and change it. Case in point, like North and South is a Victorian version of Pride and Prejudice, but that story it changes by adapting the context of the story to fit in with the political kind of social conflict of the Industrial Revolution of the North versus the old academic way of the South. And same with like even like Clueless and Emma. Clueless works because it grounds itself very much in the modern times, but still takes the heart of Emma and brings it forth because Emma at its heart is relatable to the modern times. What I'm trying to say is that you can change the time period of Wuthering Heights, but then you need to find that common thread of the social political conflict that is being told throughout this story in that time period and make it relate. It's like, again, also look at the Romeo and Juliet adaptation of Leonardo DiCaprio. It works kind of because it fits with what was currently happening with gang wars and gang violence, fit with the violence of the original Romeo and Juliet. So you need to find that common thread. You can't just willy nilly throw it into a time period because it changes. It changes a lot of things. This opening paragraph is perfection to me at least because it gives us a great sense of Mr. Lockwood and the situation, but also like us, the audience, you're trying to find some connection between you and the main character, Heathcliff, for instance. Why should we care? Why should we relate to them? And you kind of force it because you want it. So I really like it's being reflected on Mr. Lockwood, for example, when he says that I've just returned from a visit to my landlord, the solitary neighbor that I shall be troubled with, which is very interesting to start with. I shall be troubled with, which then he later follows with that, and Mr. Heathcliff and I are such a suitable pair to divide the dissolution between each other, which makes like he is not a good person. He is going to be someone that is going to trouble you. He is an embrace personality, but there is a commonality between the two of them, at least one that Mr. Lockwood believes exists, this commonality of wanting to be a solitary figure, because prior to that, he then says, this is certainly a beautiful country, which the moors and the land that exists with is extremely beautiful. That is why Emily Bronte talks so much about the moors. It's this beautiful land. And he then says, in all of England, I do not believe I could have fixed on a situation so completely removed from the stir of society, which was his intention. But like, it's fascinating because the landscape, the setting of the story is such a main character of the story, because not only is it beautiful, but it affects, again, setting is very important to Gothic, weather is very important to Gothics, but also that you're removed from society, but equally not. You're like we see with Mr. Lockwood, he is removing himself from society because of a certain situation he had put himself in, but yet he is forcing himself upon other society, that he wants to engage with Heathcliff, to interact with other people, to be intrigued and wants to know their gossip. So Mr. Lockwood also continues in the first paragraph by saying, he little imagined how my heart warmed towards him when I beheld his black eyes withdrew so suspiciously under those brows, as I rode up, and when his fingers sheltered themselves with a jealous resolution still farther in his waistcoat as I announced my name. And I think the reason why he loves it is because he fits exactly into this imagined idea that he has of the moors, of the Gothic, that Heathcliff is the epitome of that black-hearted villainous character that would have been very popular in stories of the time period that this is set in, of the late 1700s, that Emily Bronte would have read. But the difference between those characters and those stories and this one is that she's bringing more depth to him, but also playing into what is going on in society, where like the readers add more layers to those characters and they might have existed actually in text. She at least puts those layers in this book, if that makes sense. Chapter 1 continues with this conversation between Mr. Lockwood and Heathcliff, and not only does it give us a really good sense of these two characters, but it's introducing this very interesting dynamic going on of these two very different societies, and how we're entering with this story into the society of the Moors, and how it's much different from the floweriness of the South, with, Mr. Lockwood introducing himself saying, I do myself the honor of calling as soon as possible after my arrival to express the hope that I have not inconvenienced you by perseverance in soliciting the occupation of Fresh Cross Grange. And it's so flowery, this introduction. Not only is like, I do myself the honor, which feels very formal, because like he's doing himself the honor meeting Heathcliff, like why does he care? But he really doesn't care. It feels like a very like zero calorie kind of word. If that makes sense. Like there's no weight to honor. Like he's not genuinely honor. He's just going by the formality of etiquette of the South, and saying that I hope that I have not inconvenienced you by my perseverance in soliciting occupation. It's kind of like, oh, I want to apologize so we can be on good terms. It's like, again, the entire conversation here fits very well with the flowery language of etiquette. Think of some of the stuff like that would have been written at the time, like Evelina, Pamela, any of the Jane Austen books. There's a floweriness to the social etiquette. And Heathcliff responds with, Fresh Cross Grange is my own, sir. I should not allow anyone to inconvenience me if I could hinder it. Walk in. Lockwood's is such a long paragraph compared to Heathcliff's very short couple lines. And in those couple lines, not only is Heathcliff reminding Lockwood that this is mine, I own it. And this is very important for Heathcliff, as we will come to know that he came from nothing. So owning this means a lot. And especially this house means even more, because it's the house of his enemy, or what he has deemed his enemy. And he says, I should not allow anyone to inconvenience me. There's no floweriness. There's no dynamic. He's pretty much stating bluntly that I wouldn't have given you the house if it really had inconvenienced me. I don't care that much about you. I don't let people hinder me. So he's also giving him a warning of like, I'm not gonna let you hinder me. I will respond in turn. Heathcliff ends with saying like, walk in. And Lockwood notes that the walk in was uttered with closed teeth and expressing the sentiment of go to the deuce. And the walk in is so interesting, again, the dynamics, because on one hand, it is so abrupt and almost rude. And yet it is him begrudgingly abiding by social etiquette of welcoming him into his home, which I think is showing that within the Moors, they're straight to the point. They don't want it, or at least Heathcliff is straight to the point. They don't want to deal with this, but they do abide by some of, etiquette of the home, etiquette of a guest. They will invite you in, but they're not going to be happy about it compared to like much floweriness of the South. And I think a great example of also the North and South kind of in like impression of that time period would have been again the story North and South by Mary Gaskell, I believe her last name is. There's also a mini series that is excellent. I highly recommend. But it's showing like even though there's some overlap, they share some commonalities between their etiquette. They have some similarness is vastly different at the same time too. And so I think it's extra fascinating that our story, even though it's being set amongst the Moors, it is almost like a completely different culture, a completely different society. And Emily Bronte is introducing the readers to this through a character that they might recognize as themselves, as someone that maybe is coming from the South, from the academia, from the flowery etiquette of the language, easing their way into this new world with this guide. Also, getting back to the etiquette, I love this like interesting kind of like dance that's going on where like Heathcliff does know it's of the etiquette, even of the North, to welcome a guest into the home, even if you don't want it. And he's making it very well known that he doesn't want it. But yet Mr. Lockwood is kind of in a situation because it would be equally rude for him to turn it down. And now he doesn't want to enter himself, but he kind of has to because etiquette dictates it. So they're both kind of in a pickle. And I can see why Heathcliff is probably even more annoyed with Lockwood because if Lockwood hadn't come in the first place, they wouldn't be in this situation. Besides hearing Heathcliff's words immediately, we also see an action from him, which is very telling because Heathcliff sees that Lockwood's horse's breast fairly pushing the barrier. He did put out his hand to unchain it and then suddenly proceeded me up the causeway, calling as we entered the court, "Joseph, take Mr. Lockwood's horse and bring up some wine." And this is such an interesting dynamic here because, like, one, he's coming, like I said, from a low birth. That was his job previously. He does care about something. He cares about some living being, which is the horses. So he does have some compassion within his heart. He's not completely cold and heartless. So it is showing us, the readers, that there is something, a heart within him, but also showing like that was his past. That's what he used to do. But because of his new elevation, he stops himself because that wouldn't be good. He has to abide by his new role, and they have servants for that. And it's such an interesting dynamic when then you think of like other stories where you have like perhaps a duke who does have a servant but chooses himself to take care of his horse. And look how well that looks upon himself that he does it himself. But then you have in Heathcliff's situation where like he needs to put on more airs to, up himself also. And like Heathcliff is also even more in the back foot when it comes to Mr. Lockwood. And why he probably doesn't like Lockwood's appearance in the first place is that it reminds him of his power difference, his societal difference. While he might be at the top in this small neighborhood compared to Mr. Lockwood, Lockwood would be probably socially and ethically higher than him. So immediately he's already on the back foot. So he has to put on more airs. And this doesn't help and is compounded with his history that we will later learn of like him coming from nothing and having to fight his way to where he is now and what he has lost in the process. But this action is showing like he has to forgo some of this, an action that would have been deemed human to anyone, but especially someone of his position, be like, oh, look, he's willing to do that. He doesn't have to in order to hold his position of power. So that's showing that power at the end of the day means more to Heathcliff. Power and position in society means more than other actions he could choose to do. This got a little rambling. I hope that makes sense. We then meet Joseph, which Mr. Lockwood says he is an elderly, nay, an old man, very old. And I think it's very fascinating, also showing how someone in this small community who's trying to rise in power is abiding by what would be expected of like commanding servants. But how it's such a very thin facade of trying to be equals of those in power, of title, of, wealth and esteem, when, like, yes, he has a servant, but this is an ancient man. He can't really be doing much. And what he's really doing is, yeah, taking care of the horses, but he's also preaching to you at the same time, and, you know, yelling about the doom of end times kind of stuff. So it's like, is it worth it? Is it worth having this illusion of a servant if the servant himself doesn't fit within the expectations that you're trying to uphold? So I think what Emily Bronte is trying to do is show how society has made this like power and title and wealth and importance on that, and what people are willing to do to uphold that image, because at the end of the day it's an image. And even then, like, like, I don't know how to describe it. Like, it feels like people with like fake designer, like you're wearing so much fake designer, or you're wearing a lot of designer maybe to show that you have a higher class, but like old money don't wear designers brands as much as say new money does. Like, it feels very much in the same vein as that. Like, is it worth it because you think that you're of the same class as people, but it's very obviously that you're not. Mr. Lockwood then says Wuthering Heights is the name of Mr. Heathcliff's dwelling, weathering being a significant provincial adjective descriptive of the atmospheric turmoil to which its station is exposed in stormy weather. And there's so much you can unpack here, because having a home named means that you have history, you have an inheritance, you have money, there's title, like some form of title, even if you're just a simple landed gentry, you have an ancestral home with a name to it. But then to be stated by Mr. Lockwood, Wuthering is a provincial adjective, not only in its spelling, but like its use. It's saying it's small town, as backwater, which automatically is then diminishing the specialness of having like a titled home. So to Heathcliff, owning this home, there's a multitude of reasons why he wants to own this home. And one of it is to show his status. Look at me. I came from nothing. I came from the sewer, supposedly, and now own this ancestral home. I have made it. And in comparison to his neighbors and where he had started, yes. In comparison to someone with more money and wealth and status and prestige, like Mr. Lockwood, or where he had once presided, this is nothing. It's the beauty and the wonder of Wuthering Heights is like owning something, but it like, is it worth owning it? It's like owning this beautiful ancestral home that is decaying. Is it worth it? Is it worth the title? It's kind of like getting a title for a position, but the position itself is a dumpster fire, and you're like, is it worth it? Because like, you're actually being made fun of by others. Like, on paper, it looks, prestigious and it looks special, but in reality, it's a laughing stock. It's nothing. It's not that special. So I like we don't see Mr. Lockwood very much in this book, but I like his presence in the beginning because it's kind of setting up also that like all this that Heathcliff had done, the lengths he had gone to acquire and achieve all that he has, is laughable to someone else. It's not even worth it. It's not that special. So I like kind of it's setting us up the context of like, to the outer world, it's really not that special, but in this community, it was. Wuthering Heights, the house itself, too, I think it introduces an interesting conversation that could be had about like ancestral homes, family history, pride, and upstarts. Like, could an upstart buying a family home respect the history that had once inhabited the home? Could one's pride affect their downfall, that they're not willing to move on because their home is so tied to them? Like, again, Actually, I haven't talked about Georgia O'Hara here. I was like, I've talked about Georgia O'Hara a lot in my Jane Austen literary analysis, and she writes predominantly Regency. I love her books. She wrote between the 1930s and 1970s, but she has one where like the black sheep, where the son is in extreme debt, and his black sheep of an uncle wants to get him out of debt by buying the ancestral home, and he goes, "No, who would I be without it?" That is linked to him, and he does respect the home enough because it's tied to his pride. But like you have to wonder, like, Harrington Earnshaw had at least upkeep the house a lot better than Heathcliff is. So like Heathcliff doesn't respect the house and its history as much as say the Earnshaws would have, but there's still like their pride led to their downfall too. So there's a whole conversation that you can have, and like it's also being illustrated when like Lockwood detected the date 1500s and the name Harrington Earnshaw. I would have made a few comments and requested a short history of the place from the surly owner, but his attitude at the door appeared to demand my speedy entrance, because that's what etiquette would have entailed. You would have given tours of your family home. Think of Mansfield Park by Jane Austen when they go to visit the one sister's fiance's home. He gives a tour, the history, and all this because that's important. It's important to them. And so I think it's a conversation of like, should this be important? How important should it be? Maybe it should be important because those that own these ancestral homes, like, upkeep the homes, but also sometimes the community and things like that. So there's like a whole conversation I feel like you could unpack that. Like, I'm only touching the surface of here. Like, I'm talking off the top of my head, but like I feel like there's something you could like there's a lot of different little conversations that Wuthering Heights is introducing about like wealth and status and power and history and pride and all of these kind of things. To continue with the idea of like how different wealth manifests differently depending on the region you are and like society you exist in. To Lockwood, this home he describes, the apartment and furniture, would have been nothing extraordinary as belonging to a homely northern farmer with a stubborn countenance. And like a homely northern farmer. Like he deems this so beneath. Like this isn't this what normally exists in a farmer's home? No. In a farmer's home, this furniture would have been too fine for them, especially in the region that they are. In the region that they are, this kind of furniture is signifying and distinguishing this home as being of wealth. But because it's so different from the South, and even like Lockwood's experience, he may not have encountered a farmer's home. So he wouldn't know. He just knows it's not as finely rich as what he might have in the South, which would probably at this time be like silk cushions and bright colors and all these kind of things and wallpapering. His home does signify wealth, but in a very different manner. One of the main issues with the new movie potentially coming out is the casting issue with Jacob Elordi playing Heathcliff. Now, he's a great actor, but not good for this role. And many people have pointed out it's because this character is a person of color, and the person's color is, you know, important to this role. It's kind of like having a white man play Othello. That would be absolutely insane to do something like that. So, and many people go, "Oh no, he's not actually that." Like, no, he is. Literally on page 10 in my copy, there's the line, "But Mr. Heathcliff forms a singular contrast to his abode and style of living. He is a dark-skinned gypsy in aspect, in dress and manners a gentleman, that is, as much a gentleman as many a country squire, rather slovenly, perhaps, yet not looking amiss with his negligence, because he has an erect and handsome figure, and rather morose." It says he's a dark-skinned gypsy. Now, we don't know if he genuinely is gypsy in the sense of like Romani, or if maybe he's dark-skinned coming from, he might be black. Like there's arguments of what person of color he is, but he definitely is a person of color. There's no argument of that. And his color is important to this book, as I will point out as we continue, because it is something you see. You see it. And no matter how much he tries to act and dress in the ways of a gentleman, people are going to judge him immediately because they see the color of his skin. And that immediately makes them diminish him. And every time they diminish him, he wants to rail back at them. That is why Kathy understands that she cannot marry him. That is why others treat him the way that he is, because when you look at him, he looks different. And having a white guy play this character, you lose that major aspect of the story. One of the major messaging of the story is about appearances. And it's not, like physical, like person appearances, but like also, as I've been talking about, appearances of the home and things like that. But that is very important. So if you're going to make like a modern adaptation, find something similar, but still have someone of color. Like, it's important. These details are important to the heart of the story. This is not a detail that you can throw away. You can throw away, like, the servant that they talked about here. That's fine, because he's not important to the story completely. Heathcliff's coloring. So here's the thing about Wuthering Heights that many of us, myself included, forget. This is being told to us by someone else. They're not exactly unreliable narrators. They're biased. The majority of the story is going to be told to us by Nell, who is a servant, and she is very biased against Heathcliff. But even Mr. Lockwood and his impression of Heathcliff, you see upon reread, because you may not notice the first time, that his initial opinion of him is biased. He's imposing his own thoughts and feelings and conflicts onto Heathcliff and trying to find a similarity with him. When he describes that Heathcliff is a handsome figure and rather morose. Possibly, some people might suspect him of a degree of underbred pride. I have sympathetic chord within that tells me it is nothing of the sort. I know by instinct he reserves springs from an aversion to show display of feelings, to manifestations of mutual kindliness. He'll love and hate equally under cover in esteem. It is a species of impertinence to be loved or hated again. No, I'm running on too fast. I bestow my own attributes over liberally on him. Literally, he meant, he goes, oh wait, I'm moving a little too fast. I am bestowing my problems onto him, because we will get a hint that he is hiding out here because of a problem. And we have to remember also, this is the late 1700s, so we're in the midst of the transitional period between the Enlightenment thinking and Romanticism thinking. If you want to know more about those philosophies, go check out on my YT either my Jane Austen and the History She Wrote in video, or even my Ballad and Philosophy video, because I talk about those two philosophies there too. And the part of those philosophies is like also like emotions. It's reason and emotions and things like that. So he's trying to say like Heathcliff's a little bit more reserved, and that's a good thing, instead of being overly emotional, which is what's happening with the foppish men of the time. There's a whole debate about that going on. But you know like I'm saying, I think it's a very subtle way of introducing to the readers that these narrators, both Lockwood and Nell, are biased. That at the end of the story, we actually don't genuinely know Heathcliff and Kathy. We have an idea and a version of them, but we really don't know them in the end. So one of the reasons why Lockwood continues to be sympathetic towards Heathcliff, not only in the beginning but towards the end too, is because he sees something of himself in Heathcliff's story. And we get the first glimpse of it with, Lockwood telling us, the readers, that he had previously spent a fine month with fine weather at the seacoast. He was thrown into a company of the most fascinating creature, a real goddess in my eyes, as long as she took no notice of me. I never told my love vocally. Still, if looks had language, the merest idiot might have guessed I was head over ears. And he then continues to say that, like, he started removing himself. He got so scared that he confessed it. What did I do? I confessed it with shame, shrunk, isolating to myself like a snail. At every glance, retired colder and farther, till finally the poor girl convinced her mother to decamp, because she was uncertain of her impression and her feelings. And he was deemed heartlessness. And so because of that, he sees himself in Kathy, and Heathcliff, like, oh, Kathy is a goddess in Heathcliff's eyes. And he got scorned. He lost a girl because maybe he was too reserved. He was too cold, as Lockwood is describing him in this chapter. That is obviously not the case of Kathy and Heathcliff, but I love that Lockwood is us. He is the reader. We as a reader find something, or we should be able to find something relatable about a character, that we sometimes ignore all the surrounding information, ignore sometimes their flaws or horribleness, because we found something in them that makes them like us, and we don't want to see the worst in us. And that's what's kind of happening here. And I love that Emily Bronte is doing this so subtly. I think we're getting a little bit of foreshadowing also with Mr. Lockwood's interaction with this random dog, and he goes to pet him, and the dog has a guttural growl, and Heathcliff says, "You better let the dog alone. She's not accustomed to being spoiled, not kept for a pet." And I think you can almost say it's a little bit foreshadowing to Kathy, because that's what happens to Kathy a little bit later, is that like she's not kept to be a pet, which is what she ends up being a little bit when she marries Linton. And she's not meant for that. She's meant to be wild. She's meant to have, freedom and purpose. And that's what she would have had with Heathcliff, or at least that's what Heathcliff believes. So, like, and Kathy, even though she willingly and chose to be a pet, she railed at the bars of it. It wasn't meant to be that. So I think there's a little bit of like mirroring, foreshadowing, you know, metaphor. I don't know. Something going on there. The way that Heathcliff interacts with Mr. Lockwood changes drastically. Before, he is very cold, standoffish, and I wonder if it's because he sees Linton in him. Linton was a little bit more of the southern variety of class. He had a little bit more silk, a little bit more soft and eloquent, and so that's why he's like, "Oh God, not another one." He like is very cold, but then the dogs attacked him, and he is on like he's very upset, and I think Heathcliff likes that because it's like he looks at the powers in his hands, that he feels like the guy all of a sudden is angry and realizes that he is not above Heathcliff. Heathcliff has power in the situation, kind of thing. So Heathcliff all of a sudden becomes courteous and goes, "Oh, please take wine with me," genuinely, and laughs and things like that. So I think he likes that power dynamics of being reminded that, like, oh yeah, I still have the upper hand, and he's still a soft guy, kind of thing. Maybe, I don't know. I'm rambling.